Okay, so this is the recording, and I actually just realized I forgot to hit record. So if anybody needs to watch the first part of this, you could probably watch last month's if you want to go back and rewatch it, but hopefully everybody's got information that they took live. I'm just recording this, so going forward, you have something. But like I said, if you need a more in-depth demo, well, I did a pretty good demo, but I would say go back and watch last month for the archive. Or you can also, I mean, you guys should have an idea of what you're doing now, and you'll get reinforced in lab with Frank and Ari, so you should be fine. But anybody who's watching this, like online students, you probably want to watch the first part of the last month's Lecture 1 2021-08 Part 2. Watch the first part of that. Sorry about that. Get excited, and then we just kicked off, and there we go. So in the future, if you guys see me start and I don't hit record, just remind me. Okay, moving on. All right, so like I said, a lot of stuff in here. We're not worried about animation yet until we get to project 4. Live IPR, render sequence, that's what we're going to do when we get into animation. Render sequence, here's the information about the denoiser noise post imager. And we talked about the daytime, the nighttime, how to do it. And now let's talk about the third part. Oh, and by the way, here's a refresher about the camera, the render cam, and also the bookmarks for each render cam. So the daytime scene is going to have different bookmarks than the nighttime. All right, so the third part, create your own composition. Basically, you guys are going to find a photo reference off the internet of a scene you would like to try to recreate the look and feel of. Look and feel simply means you're going to use our geometry, rearrange the scene so that it gives the impression of your reference. You're allowed to scale, you're allowed to rotate, you're allowed to duplicate, you're allowed to hide. You just can't model anything, import anything from another scene, or change the lighting. All that's right here. But you say, well, with those kind of limitations, what can I possibly do? Well, let's take a look at what some other classes have done. Here we go, examples. So very simple. You know, under a bed, we've got a bedroom scene. We've got some, for the nighttime, we've got some lights in there. So there's our nighttime scenes. We got a little amp light going on there. We got a computer light. We've got a monitor light. We've got a monitor screen. We've got a laptop screen. We've got some bulbs. They're basically just taking the geometry and rearranging it. So you can stack stuff together. You can have fun with it. This one's always a popular one, Buzz and Woody and all the characters from Toy Story, because you can take all the little pieces that we have and put them together and make different looking characters. So very simple, doesn't have to be complicated. You're trying to get the camera angle, trying to frame your shot up with just some basic shapes. You're doing layout. You're not trying to make it, you know, picture perfect, camera ready, ready, set, go. No, you're just trying to get the impression of it. So this one, the most important part of this actually is that vanishing point. And they really got the good feel for that vanishing point with the light at the end. You know, the boards happen to work out like the tracks on the road, trolley tracks, train tracks. Like I said, very simple. Very simple. I mean, these are the computer mice that are sitting on the desk. Just duplicate them, move them around. So this one, obviously, there was quite a bit of stacking going on. Quite a bit of duplicating. All right, so that give you an idea of what you can do. So, like I said, pick a day scene, pick the night scene, doesn't matter. Whichever one works with your reference. If your reference is at night, pick the night scene. If it's during the day, pick the day scene. Rearrange the geometry, scale it, rotate it, duplicate it, hide it, move it, whatever you need to do. Just can't model anything, can't change the lights. The only thing you are allowed to do is add color to one of the lights if you need to. Like occasionally you'll see that really orange one, and all they did was change the color that we already had in one of the light bulbs and make it so that it matched the reference. But that's it. We're not adding textures. We're not adding materials to anything. Everything's the flat gray geometry. Does that make sense? Questions? How about out there in Zoom? Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. All right, so one more thing I want to go over with you guys before we wrap it up and take a break is I want to go over some basic camera focal length information. Oh, if anybody's interested, this is a really good video. I pointed it out when I was inside the activity in FSO. Right here, the practical guide to path tracing. It's done in the style of a 1940s Disney animation where they've got an announcer and it's like, hey, Mr. Announcer, you know, that really over exuberant voice that kind of talks about everything. But it's really good. It's about 9 minutes. They explain path tracing really well. All right, so camera lenses. You'll notice that in some of the reference, I mentioned focal lengths here. Focal length 16 millimeter, 35, 24, 70 millimeters. That's because when you guys are looking at reference off the internet, some of the cameras may have different focal lengths, meaning the lenses are going to make the image look either enlarged or magnified, or like they're shrunk down, or like they're distorted. And that's going to be a property of the actual lens itself. And we can mimic that in Maya, but you need to know how. So camera lenses can do one of two things. We can focus light or we can disperse light. Pretty simple, just like glasses. I take off my glasses, now everything is dispersed. I put it on. Oh, there you are. So lenses are broken down into 4 main categories. Anybody ever do any photography? All right, so if you've done photography, you're probably familiar with fisheye lenses, wide angle lenses, portrait lenses, and telephotos. Well, that's basically what we're going to be just talking about a little. All right, so fisheye lens, and the lens is measured in millimeters from the back of the actual lens glass itself to the camera sensor. Used to be camera film, but nobody uses film anymore. Everything is a camera sensor. Now, the smaller that distance, the more distorted the lens is. So you'll notice here of a fisheye lens, it goes from 2.5 millimeters to 15 millimeters. But we pull this up. All right, you'll notice that the top of the lens is curved, exactly like those fish laying on the ice in the grocery store. You know, they're laying up there looking at you like, take me home. Okay, it gets its name from that, the curvature of the lens. Fisheye lens sort of works the way the peephole of a door works. You look out the peephole of a door and you can almost see 180 degrees around you, but it is distorted. Its job is to show you as much area around as possible. Now, what we're doing is we are shrinking the image onto the camera sensor. Consequently, with that shrinkage and the curvature of the lens, we get this, what they call barrel distortion. Like that horizon should normally be flat straight across. But the curvature of the lens makes it look like that. It also has a tendency to make objects in the foreground appear closer and more distorted, and objects in the background to be further away and stretched. So this is good between 2.5, 15 millimeters. Honestly, like the most common, I think, are something like 9 millimeters and 12 millimeters. They're probably the most common lens types used. Now we get into wide angle. Wide angle also shrinks the film onto the plane. The camera lens is slightly curved, not nearly as bubbled as a fisheye, but slightly curved. So we get a little bit of that distortion, but not as much. Now, common, like wide angle is something like 16 millimeters, pretty common, which is what this is. A friend of mine's a photographer, took the shot. That's 16 millimeters. This one is 24 millimeters. And of course, the most popular is 35 millimeter. Does anybody know why that's popular? Every single camera you make in Maya by default is a 35 millimeter lens. It is also, I like to call it the realtor's friend. You want to take a picture and show, look how big the yard is. Look how big the living room is. Look how big the bedroom is. Look at the bath. It's enormous, right? You get a little bit of an expansive feeling with a wide angle lens. But when you get in there, you go, wait, whoa, that's like a shoebox. How many of you saw your apartments before online, right? They all look pretty big and spacious, and you go there and it's like, whoa, if I move 2 feet to the right, I'm in the bathroom. 2 feet to the left, I'm in the kitchen. You know, I go forward a step, I'm in the bedroom, and I take back a step and I'm out the door. Well, that's how it feels, but it's not that bad. But it always makes living areas a little more, it makes them appear more flattering. So any camera, any scene you get by default from Maya gives you 35 millimeter ortho lenses which are front, side, top, and also perspective. They're all 35 millimeter. So a lot of students who don't realize that all use, everything is 35 millimeter, and it all looks the same. So what I'm trying to do is get you guys to start thinking about, what am I seeing? What does it look like? Am I seeing distortion? What's causing that distortion? So wide angle lens, we're shrinking. Next, we come up with what's called a normal lens. This is honestly a portrait lens. And probably the most common portrait lens on the planet is 50 millimeters. If you're a photographer and you go buy a fixed lens, which means that's all it doesn't change focal lengths by moving it back and forth. Okay, you buy 50 millimeter lens, that is a portrait lens. It doesn't magnify or shrink the image onto the surface or onto the, I would say, camera sensor. So the last thing you want to do with facial features is make like somebody's nose look like it's gigantic or somebody's face appear flat. That's why it's a really good choice for that. Now, if you're a modeler and somebody's giving you reference images, that's probably the best reference you can get, because you're not worried about lens distortion. Am I modeling distortion into my objects that aren't there? Which I'm sure you guys talked about in modeling. Now, the last lens category is called telephoto. Telephoto varies somewhere between, well, they say 65, but the most common one is like 70 millimeters to whatever you can hold up or get other people to hold up for you. Anybody's ever been to a sporting event and you see those things that look like big giant tank barrels? Those are telephoto lenses that are like uber long. They will be able to pick something up really far away and magnify it. Now, part of the problem with magnification is that, remember, we've always got in our field of view, we try to make depth. We have a foreground, we have a midground, we have a background, right? Whenever we're trying to do art, to have depth. But the problem is when you take something really far away and you magnify it, you are flattening those foreground, midground, background planes together, which causes what's called lens compression, which means, here's an example, these buildings, we can't really tell how far apart those buildings are. Are they attached? Is there an alleyway between them? Is there a 2-lane highway, 4-lane highway? Really hard to tell. Even in these, American football, sports characters here, you can see that we've got overlap on the feet. We really can't tell how far apart they are from each other. It could be a few inches, a few feet, a couple of yards. And that is part of the problem with a telephoto lens. We tend to lose that foreground, midground, background. Now, as an artist, your job is to kind of bring that back with lighting and overlap that's, got some different values in it. If everything's got the same value, it's all going to look flat. So does that kind of make sense? So when you're looking for reference, if you see a certain type of distortion, think, well, is it like elongating things close up and making them look stretched and distorted? That might be a fisheye. Does it look really expansive? It looks, like a really flattering room, landscape. It might be a wide angle. If it looks fairly neutral, flat, it might be a portrait. If it looks a little flat, like the camera's pretty far away, but it's been zoomed in on, that might be a telephoto. So a couple of tools in Maya that you can be aware of is when you select the camera in Maya and go to the attributes, the focal length is the second attribute down here. So if you'll notice, back here, where are we? So if I select the camera and I change my bookmark, so right now I've got a 16mm focal length right here. So if I change my bookmarks to 35, the camera will change places and that bookmark will automatically keep the focal length information too. So the nice thing about bookmarks is you can use bookmarks to try different camera angles, different compositions, different focal lengths, and have them all be unique for each bookmark with one camera. Couple things you want to do when you are starting your composition: make a camera, look through it, turn on resolution gate. That's going to frame up, based on your render settings, which should be 960 by 540. That's going to frame up 960 by 540 in the viewport so you know exactly what your render is going to look like. So if I bring up a new scene, I'll create a couple of spheres. And I'm going to turn on my resolution gate, which is this little button right here. So now when I zoom in and out, I'm in perspective camera. Perspective camera automatically gives me 35mm. If I lower it down to say 12mm, now I'm into fisheye. If I zoom in, look how distorted that first sphere is. So if I go to, say, 100mm, look how flat everything looks. I can't tell the distance between them. So just kind of take all that into account when you're trying to figure out your composition. Does that make sense? Questions? All right. Well, thanks for hanging in there with me, guys. So let's go to lunch, dinner, whatever you want to call it. And let's come back at I'll come back at 5:55. By the time we get out of here, it'll probably be close to 5. All right. Any last minute questions? You guys are free to go to lunch. I'll render out the second part of lecture, what little's there. And then what you can do is come back here. Frank and Ari, you can leave your stuff. I'm going to lock the room. Frank and Ari will be here to start up lab for you. Julio, any questions?
No, sir.
Okay. I'll see you back here at 5:05 or 5:06.